Welcome to this presentation focused on the development of effective grant budgets. My name is Dr. Courtney Gamston, and I'm a professor of experiential practice at Auburn University's Harrison College of Pharmacy. I also serve as the residency program coordinator for our two PGY1 residencies. I also serve as the vice chair of the ASHP Foundation Research Advisory Council. The goal of this presentation is to provide practical information and real-world examples for consideration when building grant budgets of all sizes. I do not have any conflicts of interest to disclose related to this presentation. I would like to acknowledge the use of generative AI to build the organizational framework for this presentation. Here's an overview of what we'll cover today. Understanding grant budget fundamentals, preparing for budget development, building a grant budget, budget development pearls, and then a look at a few available resources. Let's start with understanding the fundamentals of grant budgets. Grant budgets are important for clearly outlining how the awarded resources will be utilized to support the successful completion of the project. From the funder's perspective, the budget supports the application by providing transparency to how their funds will be used. This is also important to make sure that the money will be utilized as intended by the funder and within the legal and/or regulatory guidelines of the funder. For example, nonprofit organizations serving as funders may not be able to support marketing for goods and services, or government agencies may not be able to support catering, say, for an educational event. So the transparency of the budget helps them to determine whether the proposed items actually fit within what they are allowed to do with that money. The budget also helps the reviewers to determine whether the project is feasible. Key questions answered include whether the size and scope of the project align with the available funds. The budget also provides clues about the suitability of the project team for the project. Discrepancies between the amount of money allocated to specific project activities and their real cost demonstrate that the project team may not have the level of experience needed to successfully complete the project. From the grantee perspective, developing the budget can be challenging, but there are several positive outcomes associated with taking the time to thoughtfully consider the budget. First and foremost, it requires a detailed review of the project, which can lead to identification of logistical flaws or need for additional consideration. It can also provide a reality check related to the feasibility of successfully completing the project and whether this funding is sufficient to support the project. Securing funding for specific project components also provides protection of resources. This is most easily seen in time. If I'm awarded a project that funds 10% of my time, then I have secured 4 hours of my time weekly to devote to the project. Grant projects also provide a level of accountability for how funds are allocated and are used by researchers, staff, and the funders. When considering grant budgets, it is important to understand several key terms. Direct costs refer to expenses that are clearly associated with a particular project or activity, such as salaries for project personnel, supplies to complete the work, and travel to study sites or to conferences to present the work. Indirect costs, on the other hand, are overhead expenses that support operations but are not confined to the single project. These expenses are sometimes referred to as the costs to keep the lights on. Allowable costs are those that are set forth by the funder as places where you can spend the money. These are vary based on the funder and the opportunity. For example, some opportunities do not allow for funds to be applied to personnel salaries, while others will not cover travel. It's important to review the opportunity closely to identify which costs are allowable. Cost sharing involves contributions from other sources. For example, when a grant program states that they will do a $10,000 match, that means that they will provide funding in a one-to-one ratio with another funder. In other words, they will provide $10,000 for your $20,000 project as long as 10,000 of that comes from another source. The funding period defines the specific time frame during which the allocated funds must be used. It's important to note that this may not 100% correspond to the project period. For example, you may have 18 months to complete a project, but only 12 months to spend the money. Now, let's move on to preparing for budget development. Before building your budget, it is essential to clarify the project's objectives, scope, and activities, ensuring a clear understanding of the intended outcomes. Identifying the resources required for success helps to align the budget with the project's goals, guaranteeing that the necessary financial support is in place for effective project implementation and increasing the likelihood of receiving funding. This process also encourages you to recognize less obvious costs or available opportunities that might otherwise be overlooked, creating a more realistic and comprehensive budget plan. For example, my team recently applied for funding for a community health worker supported intervention and did not identify the need for lock boxes to secure patient records during transportation from patient visits in the community back to the clinic until a final review of project logistics. Fortunately, we were able to find space within the budget after going through this meticulous activity review so that we could avoid having to find separate funding for this once the project began. Before building your grant budget, it is essential to carefully review both funder and institutional requirements and guidelines. Adhering strictly to funder instructions ensures your budget aligns with their expectations and regulations, while using provided templates streamlines preparation and helps to maintain compliance. At the same time, it's important to integrate your institution's standards and policies and protocols, ensuring that your proposed spending is consistent with internal guidelines and best practices. Let's take a look at practical considerations when building a grant budget. A standard budget typically includes personnel costs, travel expenses, equipment and supplies, and contractual and indirect costs. We will review each of these in the following several slides. When estimating personnel and salary costs for a grant budget, it's important to assess the effort and time commitment of each staff member involved. Begin by evaluating the level of effort required from each individual and calculate their wages based on hourly rates, time commitment, and their specific role within the project. Not all grants will be able to fund the amount of time required for project activities or all personnel. Make sure that any additional unfunded time can be covered by normal job functions or other arrangements. Be sure to incorporate relevant fringe benefits such as health insurance and retirement plans to ensure your budget accurately reflects the true cost of personnel. When estimating travel costs for a budget, it's essential to account for all types of travel required, including visits to study sites, but also potentially trips to present study results at conferences or meetings. A thorough budget should incorporate related expenses such as per diem allowances, conference registration fees, parking, and lodging. Additionally, it's important to review specific guidelines and restrictions imposed by the funder regarding allowable travel costs to ensure compliance through the budgeting process. There are often also limits on the amount of money spent specifically related to travel. Ensure that all covered travel is scheduled to occur within the funding period. For equipment and supply costs, it is important to account for restrictions on the type of equipment that may be purchased, as these can vary depending on the funding opportunity. Computer software expenses, including licensing and subscriptions, should also be carefully considered, since such costs might be subject to specific guidelines or limitations. Additionally, all logistics related to project activities should be reviewed, ensuring that all needed supplies are covered. For example, in projects requiring blood testing, portable sharps containers may be needed, but may not be at the front of mind when thinking about completing this testing. Contractual and indirect costs are charged at a standard rate for the institution or funder. If no rate is in place for your institution, the federal rate may be charged for specific opportunities. On the other hand, many funders set a limit for the indirect rate, which is a specific percentage of the direct budget. Pay close attention to know whether the indirect costs are included within the budget maximum or paid on top of the budget maximum. For example, one opportunity may have a budget limit of $10,000 with a 5% indirect included within its maximum. This allows for $9,523 for the project and $476.15 for the indirects for a total project cost of $9,999.15. Another opportunity may allow for $10,000 in project costs with $500 in indirects, that same 5% indirect rate, for a total project cost of $10,500. Please also note that these rates are subject to change and are known to change on an annual basis. Contractual costs arise when collaborating with external partners, which may involve additional fees and, in some cases, the payment of indirect costs to the partnering organizations. It's important to note that funders often impose specific limitations or maximum rates for these costs, and these rates can vary or change depending on the funding source. On this slide, you will see a general budget development timeline. As a first step, it is essential to review funder guidelines to identify allowable expenses. Reviewing or building a budget template at this stage can help with planning. Next, make sure that you are aware of and consider institutional policies. For example, at my institution, we cannot separate out printing costs for standard printing, so that is not something that I ever put into my budget. Assess anticipated needs for each budget category and map out project requirements to ensure they align with available funding. As you refine the budget, develop clear justification for every item, reviewing and adjusting the allocation and rationale as needed to optimize funding utilization in compliance with funding requirements. Making these adjustments is easiest if you are working with a template so that totals will automatically update as you make changes. The following are some budget development pearls to keep in mind as you move through the budget development process. When developing your project budget, keep in mind several important tips. Avoid overcommitting by ensuring that all planned activities are feasible within the available funding. If they're not, then it's time to either scale up or scale back. Reviewers can tell if the project is too ambitious for the funds available or if the budget is overinflated for the proposed work. Pay close attention to timelines, as grants may expire before your project ends. For example, if you request funds for publication fees, you need to make sure that you are ready to publish before the funding period closes. Be as specific as possible in your budgeting, but maintain flexibility so you can adjust funds in real time if circumstances change. Finally, ongoing monitoring of expenditures is crucial to keeping your project financially on track. Keep your own records in case of discrepancies. This will also help when it comes to reallocating funds in real time, as you will already know what you have spent and what remains available. Many funders require evidence of IRB review before releasing funds, so plan accordingly. Utilizing budget templates can streamline your process, making adjustments easier and lowering the risk for error. It is also beneficial to have your institutional financial experts review your budget before submission, if possible. This ensures accuracy and compliance. If you find yourself with room to add additional elements to your budget, consider including items such as participant incentives, protective administrative, technician, and/or student time, or pilot testing to maximize both efficiency and the quality of your project. Take the time to think about what components can improve the project and facilitate its successful completion. Here are just a few personnel pearls. I mentioned this on the previous slide, but I recommend giving real consideration to allocating funds for additional administrative support, technician time, and assistance from learners. Many hands make light work. For the project team, clearly define the roles and expectations for each team member to ensure everyone is aware of their commitment to the project. Finally, securing statistical support for the project can be invaluable and should be factored into the budget planning process. I've listed a few resources on this slide. Generally, you can find resources related to the specific opportunity that you are applying to on the funder's website or with their application materials. Thank you for your time. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me via email. I would like to thank the ASHP Foundation for providing the opportunity to share my expertise and experience with the future of pharmacy, and thank you to the donors who support the mission of the foundation.